Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kaitlyn. I'm an American who's moving to Australia at the end of the year, and as somebody who's dated an Australian for 2 years, and as somebody who has been preparing for this move for well over a year, I should have known better about some of these Aussie stereotypes. So today I am sharing some of the stereotypes about Australia that I thought were true as an American. The first stereotype, and Mark has called me out on this before, everybody comes from convict culture over in Australia. I really did think that most of Australia did come from convicts, and this is absolutely not true. Only about 20% of today's Australian population came from convict culture, and about a third of Australians today were born overseas. And looking back, this is something that I should have known long beforehand. Even just talking to my partner, who is as true blue and Aussie as you can meet, his family came over in the early 1900s. And they came from Spain. They didn't come from convict culture back in the 19th century. So I should have known better, like why I didn't put two and two together is on me, but no, most of Australia did not come from convict culture. Only about 20% of Australians today did in fact originate from the convict culture that started in Australia's penal colonies. In fact, Australia didn't completely start as a convict culture. Obviously, Britain did send a lot of convicts over. It's tough to get the exact figures, but I think they sent a total of 162,000 convicts over. But there were also a lot of free settlers that came over in the 1700s and 1800s as well. Even Charles Dickens sent two of his sons over to Australia. A lot of the lower and middle class and the bourgeoisie class came over in order to start a new life in the new country of Australia. So no, even though I thought a lot of Australians came from convict culture, this is not true. Like a lot of Americans, this one I really thought was true, and it's something that I know still scares a lot of people into not visiting Australia, and that is that there are deadly snakes everywhere. Obviously, Australia is home to some of the most venomous snakes in the world, but chances are if you're visiting the main cities, if you're living in the local suburbs, you're probably not going to run into a little brown snake or a red belly black anywhere. And while you do start to see a majority of snakes come out in the spring around the time of year that I'm filming this video, it's very rare that you're going to see them in the major cities throughout Australia. Obviously, you're going to run into them when you're hiking, when you're in the outback, but just remember that for the most part, they're just afraid of you as you are of them. So whether you're going hiking in the bush or the outback somewhere, it's important to have a little bit of knowledge of what to do just in case you do get bitten by a snake. It never hurts, but it's not something, well, the bite might actually hurt, but it doesn't hurt to have this knowledge before you go out hiking. If you're not sure, 5 minutes on Google, 10 minutes on YouTube will give you a great idea of what to do in case something does happen. The likelihood of it happening, though, is very minimal. And just to put this into perspective a little bit more, snakes throughout the entire world kill over 81,000 people a year. In Australia, the average deaths from a snake bite is 2. 2 people die in Australia every year from snake bites. So if you're afraid to come over to Australia because you might die from being bitten by a snake, that's probably not a very good excuse not to come over. As an American, I looked into this, and it doesn't take population differences into account, obviously, but about 5 people every year die in the US from venomous snake bites, and there are between 7,000 to 8,000 venomous snake bites in the US every single year. And I found out when I was looking this up that apparently you cannot kill a deadly snake in Australia unless it is a life-threatening case. Australia's Nature Conservation Act of 2014 actually made it illegal to kill a venomous snake in Australia unless you are in a life-threatening situation with it. So if you kill a venomous snake in Australia, you could actually be fined up to $10,000 and even face imprisonment for killing a deadly snake. So they do take conservation fairly seriously here in Australia. This is a serious offense. So unless you are somehow, some way, in a life-threatening situation with a deadly snake in Australia, which is very slim to begin with, don't kill it.
Have a look at this little beauty. Aren't they glorious? This is the death adder.
Like so many Americans, I was worried about Australian wildlife. Besides snakes, there are obviously other animals that I was worried about, including sharks, crocodiles, and box jellyfish. The chances of dying from any of these in Australia, however, are very, very slim. In fact, you're more than twice as likely to die in a riptide as you are from shark attacks, croc attacks, and box jellyfish stings, all combined. The US and Australia actually have the highest number of shark attacks anywhere in the world. In 2019, there were 33 shark attacks in the US, 3 of which were fatal, and surprisingly, there were 18 shark attacks in Australia, but 6 of them were fatal. Crocodiles kill on average 1 to 2 people a year in Australia, whereas alligators in the US kill an average of about 1 person a year. And the Australian box jellyfish kills an average of less than 1 person a year, but riptides kill an average of 21 people a year in Australia. So you are twice as likely to die in a riptide in Australia than you are from any sort of deadly water animal in Australia. So being afraid of going into the water for something like a shark or a crocodile probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Obviously, you want to check the areas where you're going swimming, see if there are any signs. You probably don't want to be going to a beach that is completely empty if you are a tourist. You want to make sure that you know the areas that you're going to the areas with other people as well. And obviously, if you're going to a popular beach, swim between the flags. It's not that hard, guys. If you guys are liking this video so far, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. I post weekly about this process of moving to Australia and the differences between American and Australian cultures. This next stereotype that I absolutely believed was that most Australians have blonde hair and blue eyes. And I think this is kind of a mix of Hollywood and the Aussies that I met when I was in the States before my first trip to Australia. So obviously we're used to seeing pictures of Crocodile Dundee, of the Hemsworth brothers. There's a lot of pictures of Nicole Kidman with her dyed blonde hair and her gorgeous blue eyes. But a lot of these stereotypes with Australia do seem to perpetuate from Hollywood, particularly the whole Crocodile Dundee era. I don't think anyone's ever really shaken that off. Even with Australia becoming more and more in the Hollywood spotlight, there's still this notion of the Paul Hogan Crocodile Dundee outback.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Like I said earlier, a third of Australians are born overseas. And because it's so ethnically diverse, it's really tough to get statistics on how many blonde hair and brunette and redhead and green-eyed and brown-eyed and gray-eyed people are in Australia. It is so diverse of a country that the stereotype has been completely lost in the last 50 years. Up until the mid-1970s, it was very difficult for anybody outside of a European country to immigrate into Australia through a policy not so nicely known as the White Australia policy that started when the Federation was founded in 1901. But this drastically changed with the Racial Discrimination Act of 1975, so there was a huge influx of immigrants from other continents as well, particularly Asia and Africa, which added to the ethnic diversity in Australia's country. A lot of Europeans came over in the early 1900s, and it was almost strictly Europeans who were allowed to come over due to the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, which allowed a dictation test. This was used to deter people from other continents, from non-European countries, from coming over to Australia. They would give a sort of dictation test in any European language, and you had to be able to dictate 50 words. So if you had somebody from China who was trying to immigrate into Australia, they could give them a dictation test with the French language, and if they failed, they weren't able to immigrate over to Australia. This policy has long been gone since the Racial Discrimination Act of 1975, which prohibits racial discrimination for immigration purposes along with many other purposes. So while maybe 60 years ago, the idea of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aussie might have been a little bit truer than it is today, in the 21st century, this is no longer true in Australia. So while I did fall into the trap of believing that a lot of Aussies are blonde hair and blue-eyed, partly because the Aussies that I met in the States just happened to fall into that category, this is not true of Australia. It is a very diverse country with a large variety of people in all shapes, colors, and sizes. Now this last stereotype, I don't know if this was just dug into my brain because I went over to Australia in the summer, along with the way a lot of people think of Australia. I thought that it was hot everywhere in Australia. Some places in Australia it does get incredibly hot, more so than I'm used to here in Philadelphia in the States. The hottest day on record in Alice Springs, which is in this little central area of the country. I don't remember the state that it's in off the top of my head. I think the Northern Territory? maybe? The hottest day in Alice Springs actually reached 117 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 47 degrees Celsius. I'm still trying to learn a bit of the metric system, so please bear with me with this. Whereas their coldest day on record actually reached -8 Celsius, which is 18 Fahrenheit. It's below freezing. I would have never thought that a place that could get that hot could also get that cold. Sydney actually just had a record-breaking heat wave on Australia Day this year in 2021, where it reached 40.2 degrees Celsius at the Sydney airport, which for my Americans is 104.3 degrees Fahrenheit. That is incredibly hot. Obviously, that would feed into the stereotype of it being hot all the time in Australia. But just like Alice Springs, Sydney has reached -8 degrees Celsius before, which is 18 degrees Fahrenheit, which is below freezing. There are places where it does snow in Australia. Australia actually has some beautiful places to go skiing and snowboarding. So if you are somebody in the Northern Hemisphere who kind of wants a little bit of a cooler break, a snow break, coming to Australia to go skiing and snowboarding is an absolute possibility. There are gorgeous places here. Australia is known for its beautiful landscapes, and even though I had never really thought of snow as being part of Australia's landscape, it definitely is. So if you ever want a little skiing, snowboarding break in the middle of your summer, then come to Australia, because New South Wales and Victoria have beautiful places to go skiing. So these are some of the Australian stereotypes that I thought were true as an American. If you're American and you believed any of these, let me know down in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button and join our little Australian family. I post weekly about moving to Australia and the differences between American and Australian cultures. My name is Kaitlyn, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!